Cracking down, President Trump's tariffs on Canada and Mexico start on Tuesday. The president claiming that drugs like fentanyl and illegal aliens are flooding into the country at unacceptable levels, and the import taxes would finally force these countries to end the trafficking of the drugs and the illegals. He also wants to cut down on that trillion-dollar debt that we have as well, hoping that the tariffs will help bring in some revenue to the country. Here to discuss is the president of the Strellmark LLC, business development consultant, Hillary Fordwich. Great to have you here. Welcome to Sunday Report. You're a regular guest here. We love having you on. What's the impact going to be of these tariffs on the United States economy? But more importantly, do you think it's going to be, will this help drive the U.S. auto industry, given that a lot of cars are coming across the border from Canada?
Well, John, pleasure to be back with you too. Always pleasure. Few things here, many issues with regard to Canada, and particularly with those car imports. Well, first of all, when you talked about tariffs and us as a nation, President McKinley, he was the one that actually, there were so many tariffs in his era. We were so wealthy, and President Trump has talked about this. We were so wealthy, John, back in the end of the 19th century, they actually had to set up a blue ribbon commission, I believe it was in 1890, to determine how to spend all of our money. We were such a wealthy nation. Before the First World War, we didn't even have taxes. So when President Trump has talked about the external revenue instead of internal revenue service, that's from tariffs. So now the answer to your question with regard to tariffs. Tariffs can drive the American economy because we are the supplier of the world. Every country, John, needs us more than we need them. Now, with regard to Canada, I will say this with regard to oil and the car industry related to this, but particularly with regard to oil, we need their heavy crude. Actually, American oil, for whatever reason, it's considered light, and all of our refineries sort of need this cocktail of Canadian crude, heavy crude, as well as our light oil, and that makes, in quotes, a cocktail that the whole rest of the world wants. Now, with regard to our car industry, yes, we need to do what it takes to get our car industry, particularly back in the destroyed Detroit, American workers back to their jobs. And that will come from making sure that at least we have tariffs with other nations. Why? Because they have taken advantage of us for too long. It has to be reciprocatory.
You brought up the oil, and this is something that President Trump just mentioned. He says, Trump's saying that he wants the Keystone XL pipeline to be finally built. He put this out on Truth Social, saying the construction of the pipeline was halted in 2021 after former President Biden revoked a permit needed for a U.S. stretch of the project. Now, I want to go back to this because the Keystone XL pipeline, nothing's happened in the last 4 years because Biden, he did kill this deal on the first day in office. Now, if you're going to build this pipeline, Canada, it was, as you mentioned, it has to come from Canada down to the Gulf of America. But what these oil companies, they haven't done anything in the last 4 years. Are they going to be able to just, up and build this thing? Doesn't a lot of initial work have to go into, getting, they might get approvals now under President Trump, but they put these projects on the back burner because Biden wouldn't approve them. Are they going to be ready to go and just be, okay, let's start that Keystone XL pipeline again tomorrow?
Well, great question. It's wonderful that President Trump says drill, baby, drill. But a few things here. It used to take between 3 to 5 years to get permitting. Now, what I've heard experts say is it's probably down to about 2 years at best because of the regulatory aspects that have been removed by President Trump already in his first days in office. So regulations have been reduced. That's really great. Now, with regard to Canada, the Premier, Danielle Smith of Alberta, she has said, let's get those shovels in the ground. So she's all for it. She's all behind it. She wants to start that. The issue is going to be, John, though, with regard to the permitting, there are lawsuits by Native American tribes all across that pipeline. And there's talk of moving the pipeline. And there were a lot of lawsuits coming out of Montana. Should it go down through South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana? And I will say with regard to, as you mentioned, not just the permitting, but the economic costs. Yeah. Senator Jim Risch from Idaho, he had said back in 2023 that the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline by President Biden, the first day he got in office, cost between 3.6 and 9.6 billion and between 16,000 and 59,000 jobs. So, John, it was devastating for every single state that was included in the Keystone Pipeline. So let's hope we can get the permitting down to 2 years and we can all move forward.
It's interesting, too, because that Alberta would be behind the project again because they got fleeced the first time. They were helping support this project to go through,
Yes.
and then it ultimately got, canceled. So they lost a lot of money, and Albertans' taxpayer money
That's a huge
was
issue.
going to help pay for
all
it.
those companies have invested. Yeah, absolutely. Huge issue for every single company that was invested in this project.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I just want to make it clear, too, with that, the Keystone XL pipeline, if it did get built, would it actually affect the price of fuel at the pump? Or is it a different type of oil? Would it be sold overseas and both Canada and the U.S. would get rich off of selling that oil to other countries?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, one of the first things we need to do is to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which Biden actually ran that down only for his election purposes to get, hopefully he wanted to get, of course, reelected. So that's why he was releasing so many, I think it was like 400 million barrels. I know that it's the lowest level now since 1983. And John, it's called strategic because it was for the safety of our nation. So number one, we have to refill that Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's really important, number one. Number two, eventually, of course, yes, definitely American gas prices are going to come down at the pump. But as I mentioned, it will take over 2 years. Even if everything was expedited and if there were no lawsuits, it's not going to be another couple of years. And we want this to happen in Trump's administration as soon as possible.
You'd have to get an oil company, too, to take on that project as well.
Exactly. They've moved on. They said they've moved on. Yeah, they've all been messed around twice. Both Biden and Obama killed it in 2008.
Yeah, it takes some heavy lifting there. But we will wait and see what happens. And clearly, this is a big part of the Trump administration's plans is to drill, baby, drill. Hillary Fordrich, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Always. Thank you.